Everyone has a story to tell. Welcome to DingoTalk, where we explore the experiences that make us who we are. Here's your host, Carlo Guadagnino.
What's going on, Chuckleheads? I am Carlo Guadagnino. This is DingoTalk. My guest this week is the head football coach at Norwich University, Coach Bill Russell. But before we get into Coach Russell's story, let's talk about Norwich a little bit. Norwich University, founded in 1819 in Northfield, Vermont, is the oldest private military college in the United States and the birthplace of ROTC. Norwich offers a unique blend of military and civilian education. About half of their students, their student population, participate in the Corps of Cadets. They have 2,642 students. It's about $67,860 before aid, $25,897 after aid. They have an 83% acceptance rate and a 60% graduation rate, with their top three majors being criminal justice, intelligence, and computer and information sciences. Again, if you're interested in Norwich, you want any more information, you got to talk to your guidance counselor, reach out to some of the enrollment counselors at the university, talk to your coach, talk to the coaches that are recruiting you and your family. Also check them out on their website at norwich.edu. Now into today's show. Bill Russell was named the head football coach the end of 2023. He served 16 years with the Cadets, and he's recognized as one of the top recruiters in New England. So Norwich is hoping that that's going to benefit them, and we're going to hear a little bit about what his recruitment style is like, among other things. So without further ado, this is Coach Russell. What's going on, Chuckleheads? I am Carlo Guadagnino. This is Dingo Talk. My guest this week is the head football coach at Norwich University, Coach Bill Russell. Coach, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, man. Excited to be have the opportunity to talk to you.
Absolutely. I'm excited to learn a little bit more about the military academies out there and how they do their recruiting and how they survive as the recruiting field ever changes. So before we do that, got to do it the same way we do every week. Got to throw you in the time machine. We got to talk about your playing days. So in 2001, how do you find yourself at Mount Ida College?
Kind of an interesting story. So I grew up in Maine, southern Maine, and kind of took the, for lack of a better term, easy path, went to the University of Maine, the in-state school that a lot of people were going to. This was back in 99. And, thought I was done with football. Good high school career, but thought I was done. And then, as so often happens, got the itch, right? And who did I start hanging out with when I got to the University of Maine? All the football guys, right?
Right.
So, being, 5'8.5" on a good day and not particularly fleet of foot, so on and so forth, I couldn't play at Maine. So I started looking at some options, and my story, by the way, I would not advise anyone to do it this way, but it worked out. So I started doing, kind of what a lot of kids do, right? And I started reaching out to pretty much every school in the Northeast, and in some cases even down to the Mid-Coast, and ended up, Mount Ida was never even on my radar. I wasn't familiar with Mount Ida College or anything like that. And after a year in between of working at a gym and going to school part-time to kind of repair some academic issues, I went down to visit Mount Ida. The coach at the time, Ed Sweeney, who passed away a few years ago, unfortunately, but he was the head coach, relatively new there, and was really kind of, taking a program that was only a couple years old, but kind of starting over. And went and visited him, and, the school was fine and everything was fine, but I really liked Coach Sweeney, and got in the car with my dad and said, I'll go here, right? And so that's how I ended up at Mount Ida. And again, I wouldn't advise any recruit to ever do it that way. But ultimately that relationship and that experience at that school is what led me into coaching. So, everything happens for a reason, but yeah, I definitely would choose a school based on more than just liking the head coach.
And that's coming from a head coach. So that's pretty,
right. That's right.
Now, Coach, after so you get back into playing, you play for 4 years there. And then I notice, as a lot of coaches do, is when your playing days are done, but it's that itch is still there. you got into coaching. Now, my first question is, since you coached guys that you played with, probably if I had to guess, what, 4 months removed from being on the sideline with them, you're then coaching them. How difficult is that transition from player to, listen, we can hang out, but at the end of the day, I'm your coach now. I'm not necessarily a buddy. How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about, establishing boundaries early. And, Coach Sweeney was a great mentor of mine and really said, I'm not going to use the words he used, but basically said, hey, you just graduated, you're going to school with these people, whether it's your teammates, the guys in the dorms, the undergrad females. He was like, don't poop where you eat. He didn't use that word, but he made it pretty clear that, you have to make that separation early. And I was fortunate that it was a good group of guys that really kind of understood now that the relationship was different. And I had an added layer of complexity to it because the coaching position that I lived on campus. So I had kind of like an apartment in the dormitory. So that was another layer, right? But really just kind of established the boundary early. The guys were good about it, and it never really was an issue. And I know some people struggle with that now that I've been doing this 20 years and talking to young coaches all over the place. For me, it was really never that big of an issue. I think there was a little bit of help in the fact that because I was a transfer in and stuff, I was already a couple years older than them. I graduated I think I turned 25 like the month after I graduated. So I was a little bit older and, just you got to establish the boundaries early. You got to have real clear lines of communication about what's appropriate and what's not. And, it relatively seamless for me.
Now, why go into coaching? Was it just the bug was there and you didn't want football to be done, or what was it?
Totally different, actually. So my whole life growing up, I wanted to be a teacher and I went to school, got my degree in education, took the exams. I got licensed in the state of Massachusetts where Mount Ida was located to be a teacher. And everybody's telling me, right, they want male teachers. They want male teachers. They want male teachers. So going into my last semester of school, when all I was really doing was student teaching, I had like one class on Tuesday nights. And but student teaching, I started to realize that maybe I didn't want to teach. But here we go. I spent, a long time to be a teacher. And so I go through the process. I apply to a whole bunch of different schools down there to be a teacher, and I got zero. I mean, I got no bites for whatever reason. And so I go back to Maine, for the summer. I go back to my summer job I had during college, and I'm like, basically, I'll do this for the summer and kind of figure out what I'm going to do with my life when fall rolls around. And Coach Sweeney called and, said they called it essentially a coach in residence. It was basically a GA, but they didn't have a grad school. So it was $3,000 in a dorm room and I get to eat in the dining hall. So kind of at the time it was like, okay, well, at least this is a job, right? And then I'll figure out what I'm going to do. And as corny as it sounds, we get into preseason camp and literally the first practice, I was like, well, this is pretty cool. I'm going to do this. And here we are 20 years later. So but yeah, the plan was never really to be a coach. My high school coach always told me he thought I had some of that in me, but it just wasn't on the radar until, I started doing it and realized that you could actually get paid to coach and be around football, and the rest is kind of history.
Now, you spend 3 years at your alma mater. Why in 2008 was it time to branch out and take a journey to Norwich?
Yeah, so Coach Sweeney had stepped down, and I was actually a 27 or 28, whatever I was, 27-year-old interim head coach. And, I was not ready to be a head coach by any stretch of the imagination. Hoped to get an interview just for the experience, right? And didn't work out that way. And they hired a new coach and he came in and he was wonderful to me. I was on contract through the year and, he offered me a spot to stay, but it would have been a change in position because I was kind of the high man on the totem pole at Mount Ida at the time. And so I started to kind of look at some options, and Coach Sweeney from a distance, made some calls on my behalf. And I ended up with 3 job offers, and I had known the guys at Norwich really, really well through camps and recruiting and Sean McIntyre was the head coach, who was a great guy and remains a real mentor and advisor to me. And interestingly, I just met a woman who's now my wife. Once again, I don't recommend that necessarily for young coaches out there, but one job was out in Minnesota, one job was in Washington, D.C., and one job was here in New England where she was. So the combination of the familiarity with Norwich, I had played against Norwich, I had coached against Norwich, I knew the coaching staff well, and her, and I decided to take this option and come up here. And I always kind of had some envy. Anybody who's ever seen a Norwich game, there's an unbelievable home game atmosphere here with all the military pomp and circumstance, and they were tough teams. They played real physical, and so there was always a little bit of affinity for the place. Anyhow, I had some friends from high school that I knew that went to school here, so thought, again, like so often happens, right? I thought I'd come up to Vermont for a few years and kind of build my experience, and then see where the next opportunity took me, and here we are.
So 16 years on the sideline. Walk us through. I've talked to a couple coaches that have gone through this process in the last couple of years. When you're interviewing to be the head coach, so now you're very familiar with the program. Now it's time you're interviewing for this open position. Is that conversation about football, or is that conversation recruiting and fundraising and kind of everything as far away from the X's and O's as you can get?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It was, I watched Coach LeBeau from Western New England's episode with you, and I've known him a long time. He's a great guy and a great coach, and we kind of had similar, I think, experiences. In terms of an interview, it was more of a conversation. About, would you be interested in taking over? And then from there, it was just going through kind of there was some football talk, but the football talk was more along the lines of, I want to be involved in the entire program. So, will I have the flexibility to hire my own staff? Will I have the flexibility to hire a coordinator on both sides of the ball so that I'm a defensive guy, I always have been. And I still do coach the linebackers here, but I didn't want to be a coordinator.
Right.
So, that was, in terms of scheme and X's and O's, like there wasn't a whole lot I could answer because I didn't know what we were going to be yet. I didn't know, I knew who I wanted to hire. Unfortunately, I was able to hire them both, but, it was more of like the recruiting piece, so on. I had a great track record of recruiting at this institution. So that was a significant, I think, part of me getting the job. And, all those things you talk about. Like I had built some strong relationships with alumni over 16 years as an assistant. That tends to happen. So a lot of it, as you alluded to, there was a lot more of that type of conversation about recruiting and staff building and that stuff of that nature than the X's and O stuff. Because, I couldn't have been able to answer that stuff,
Right.
I'm going to hire the best coordinators I can, and whatever they want to run, more or less is what we're going to run.
Right.
With some conversation and input from me. So, that's kind of how that process went. Was a lot more talk about like recruiting, staff building, roster building. Our numbers had gotten low, so we had to build back the roster and stuff like that. So that was primarily what the discussions were about,
Now, Coach, let's talk about what was the big takeaway for you before we get into kind of the questions that I have prepared that we talked about earlier. What was the takeaway in 2024 for you for the first year as the head coach? Obviously not the season you wanted, but there's got to be things to build off of over a 10-game season.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the things, right, when you're a head coach for the first time is I don't know that I was fully prepared for how much personnel management, be it roster, coaching staff. I believe that my job, right, is to put everyone in the program, from the coordinators to the assistants to the players, in a position to be successful. So, there's a lot more of that goes into it than I probably understood. And then, you alluded to it, right? Like I don't hide from it. Everybody's got the internet. Like we didn't win a game this year, right? Certainly not the wins-loss standpoint where we thought we'd be. But that being said, I think we were able to make some significant strides off the field. Our team GPA is up 2 consecutive semesters. Our culture, the kids played their guts out every week. And if you don't do that, you don't have a chance, right?
Right.
And, when I say anything about years prior, I was here. Like I was part of the problem. I'm not blaming anybody, but I don't know that in like 23, 22 that we as a program always did that. I
Okay.
think we didn't learn how to handle adversity really well. Um, and so we had to address that, right, significantly. And again, I was part of the problem. So bringing in some good coaches and good coordinators that really helped me mold that culture into a team that just played really, really hard no matter what happened, and was able to go on the road 0-9 last week of the season and play a good team in Salve Regina, a very good team, play them really, really tough and go right down the wire. That's tough to do
Right.
when we haven't won a game and you're on the road. And so that was kind of, again, things you take away was the mentality switch that our kids had. And I don't know how much you know about that game, but the idiot head coach said, we didn't come here to tie, we're going for the win. Late, we went for two, we didn't get it, we lost by a point. But the kids on the sideline, every single kid said, go for it, coach, let's go. That winner's mentality had really starting to take shape. The easy thing would have been kick the PAT and take our chances with the last minute and a half, but they said, coach, we came to win. So that's a real springboard. That last game of the year for us was a real springboard into the offseason, into recruiting, all that stuff. And it's carried over really well into the strength program and heading into spring ball in a couple of weeks. So, there's definitely some positives to draw from. And I had a lot of grace this year from the administration, the alums, because they came. I opened the doors. They were at practice. They were around the team. They were on the sidelines. They saw us play.
Mm-hmm.
Our president watches us practice probably 3 days a week. And, they saw the effort, the attitude, the energy shift. So despite the wins-loss standpoint, I got a lot of grace and everybody's pretty happy right now. I'm not stupid. We got to win some games coming up, but but I also know that, seeing that shift did wonders for us going forward in a positive way.
All right, Coach. Now we're going to jump into, I broke these down into 4 categories. They're the recruitment and program development, scheduling and competition, coaching philosophy and advice, and then fan and alumni engagement. So we're going to start with the recruitment side. Norwich has a very unique appeal as a military college. How does that impact the approach that you take in recruiting student athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I say that Norwich is really kind of a one-of-a-kind school. And the reason I say that is, we're the oldest of the 6 senior military colleges. The only 2 schools in America that are really set up the same way as us are Texas A&M and Virginia Tech. Those schools are huge. We are not. So are we the same? Debatable, right? We're set up the same way with the Corps of Cadets, the commissioning track, the civilian students. But I think because they're so much larger, that's really not comparable. So, I approach it as we're really kind of a one-of-a-kind institution, right? And if there is a kid who has interest in that military lifestyle, ROTC, at the birthplace of ROTC, all those things, like we got to be on that kid, right?
Yeah.
We got to be on that kid like dogs on a stake. But we also do have some really elite academic majors to offer kids who maybe aren't looking at the military side as well. And you look at our roster construction, we're about half and half with the military core of cadets side and civilians. We probably lean a little bit towards the military side, which is normal. But you really have to identify fit at whether you're talking about Norwich or the Coast Guard Academy or whatever. And I do think we have a different layer because we do have a lot of civilian students, but they have to be comfortable in that environment. They don't have to participate, but they have to be comfortable in that environment. And some kids aren't, right? And that's okay. But we really have to do a lot of work on the front end of first and foremost saying, hey, we offer this, military lifestyle that most schools don't. So like kind of when you start your list, like number 1, right? We got to look at those kids and then build out from there. Is it a geographic fit? Is it an academic fit? What's the hook?
Mm-hmm.
And start from there. And we've been really lucky. I hired some really good recruiters who have done a great job, but that's kind of the starting point for that recruiting piece.
And the follow-up, this one kind of led from our discussion before we were on the show. How do you compete with the other D3 schools that don't have the military structure? Do you think it's an advantage for you? For some athletes, and then is it a challenge for the civilian side of the athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I think I look at it as at the end of the day, I think it's a benefit. I do think I fall back to it a lot, but I think we're a one-of-a-kind school, right? And we really push that in recruiting, regardless of if you're looking at the Corps of Cadets or you're a civilian. One of a kind schools and opportunities lead to one of a kind lives, and jobs and all those things. So, there's a lot to that part of it. I think again, everything that makes us unique is a benefit at the end of the day. But again, it's no school is for everyone, but we probably have an added layer of it's not the right fit for everybody. I think it really depends, on who you're looking at when you talk about is comparing to other Division III schools. In some regards, in some places, like our academic profile is pretty high. So yeah, that's probably
Right.
really appealing. But for some other majors and stuff like that, and if they're not interested in the military, like we know going into it, we're probably not going to get that kid, and it's really about identifying fit. I think every coach will say that, but I
Hmm.
think it becomes even more critical when you're talking about a school like ours. They really have to fit the culture of the institution, right? Even before they
Right.
fit the culture of the football program. Again, at the end of the day, I could complain about the challenges and the limitations, or I could embrace them and say it's what makes us special and unique. And I choose the latter. Life's short, too short to be miserable, right?
Facts on that. Coach, what are you looking for? What's a Norwich guy?
Yeah, I mean, I tell kids all the time, right? A lot of kids ask me, right, in recruiting, like, what are you looking for, coach? And it's really just three things is all I care about. And my assistant coaches would maybe answer this differently. I'm sure some other coaches would answer it differently, but because Norwich is so focused on experiential learning and career advancement, right? You got to be serious about your future. I
Right.
tell kids all the time, you don't come to Norwich to get an education, you come here to prepare for a career. You can go anywhere and get an education. To paraphrase Good Will Hunting, right? You can get an education at the library for late fees, but you come here to prepare for a career. Are you tough? And that just means like, are you willing to stick your face in there, right?
Yeah.
And are you athletic? And there's varying degrees. We're a Division III program like every other else. We have some super athletic kids, and we have some kids who are, maybe slightly limited athletically. But if you have those three things, like you can fit here, right?
Mhm.
Now, the added layer to that is we have a living, breathing honor code at our school, just like West Point, the Naval Academy, and so on and so forth. And it applies to all students, not just in the Corps of Cadets. So, you can't lie, you can't cheat, you can't steal here, or you're gone. So, you got to have a little bit of that ethical, moral background and backbone to really fit into the institution. Those things, if you can do those things, right? If you'll tell the truth and you'll work hard and you're serious about your career, we'll find a way to put you in a position to be successful. That's kind of been my philosophy and our coaching staffs.
Now, Coach, moving on to the scheduling and competition side of these questions, the ECFC has seen some shifts in its membership over the years. How does that impact you scheduling and the long-term stability of the program? Because as you shift, you got to find, if you lose teams in a conference, then you guys are kind of shifting to find another conference to play in. Hopefully not, but I'm looking at more of the long term and the hypotheticals. But how does the change in scheduling and conference opponents affect you guys?
Yeah, well, we left. I think we were the first ones to leave the ECFC, which is probably our fault. The general gradual collapse, and then joined the new MAC. What we found in the ECFC was being kind of the elder statesman as a program. We had to schedule as difficult as possible non-conference, right?
Right.
To really, you know, kind of build up that resume, for lack of a better term. And then the shift came, and we're playing in the new MAC, which is a great league here in New England with a lot of really good teams. And we wanted to keep Castleton on the schedule as a rival here in state. So there's one of your non-league games, right? And
Right.
St. Lawrence in the Liberty League has been a long time rivalry opponent for Norwich. So there's number two in your non-conference, right? So I think for us from a scheduling standpoint, it's trying to find good fits for good competitive games without significant travel. Up until 2 years ago, Catholic was in the New Mac, so that was a Washington D.C. trip every other year. So trying to limit like every D3 school in the country, right? We have some financial limitations in what we can do. So, you want to find games that are as competitive as possible. Prepare you for your conference schedule. Again, hats off. We're in a great league with some great
Mm-hmm.
programs, really good coaches. Our conference champion Springfield up there behind you on the wall just had an unbelievable run, and Coach Sarasulo does a phenomenal job with that program. So, we faced some bears during the year, and you want to be prepared for that. But I also don't think, you can't overburden yourself non-league either.
Right.
So, it's kind of a delicate balance, like you say, of finding just the right fit. And, we want to play the best programs in New England because we aspire to be one of the best programs in New England. So fortunately for us, we got a number of them right within our
Right.
conference. And then trying to find whether it's the conference in New England or the MASCAC or whatever else we can do to see how we stack up. We played Endicott non-league for 2 years, and played them decent, and they've been unbelievable the last few years. And obviously we
Mm-hmm.
get Springfield in conference. We've had Husson the last 2 years non-league, great program up in Maine. So it's kind of a balancing act between playing the best teams you can without kind of overextending yourself non-league.
And then interesting, you talk about balance. How do you balance the demands of football with the rigorous, the military training, and as you've pointed out, the academic standards of the university?
Yeah, I mean it's corny and cliche, but it's also true. We have found that communication solves so many problems, and here at Norwich, and I know some other military schools as well. Each year, there's a different student regimental commander that's kind of in charge of the Corps of Cadets for that year as a senior. And the first thing I did, I took over the program really in January. The regimental commander for this school year was announced last spring. Wonderful young woman named Sophia Righthouse. And I immediately, when she was named, reached out to her, set up a meeting. And, for the first time in over a decade that I've been here, we really didn't have any conflicts. It was really kind of as simple as her saying, all right, so what are you doing this part of the day? And I was like, nothing. She's like, well, what are you doing this part of the day? I was like, well, that's when we're going to lift and practice and film. She's like, okay, so we'll do our stuff here. You do your stuff there. Boom. It was pretty
Boom.
easy. Yeah, it was pretty easy. So we do have the added layer of if the kids are actively in ROTC and under contract, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, they have some additional demands. But if you just open the lines of communication, it really limits, the rigors and our kids, if there's competition coming up and stuff, they can get a day off from PT in the morning. They feel like they're getting their work in the afternoon with us and so on and so forth. So this is just a little bit of give and take. But it's kind of funny, and I say this not to be derisive of anybody, but every year I watch, Army or Navy or Air Force play on TV, and they all say, look at this kid's schedule. You think you've got it tough. Look at his schedule. And all of them, it says 6 a.m. wake up. Our kids get up at 5:15. Well, I'm always like, hey, come up to come up to Northfield and do a feature on our guys. So they're sleep deprived, and an example of how to balance that is I got away from doing stuff in the morning. We just
Right.
don't do anything in the morning anymore. We used to do some 6 a.m. lifts. We'd occasionally practice at 6. And I just felt like if we're going to talk about rest and recovery, then we need to give them a chance to rest and recover. So we moved everything later in the day, and just to try to limit that conflict and strain on them and make sure they're getting up and they're at their formation when they need to be in the morning and all that stuff. And, again, it's really just a give and take. And if you just communicate, we really haven't had too many issues.
What advice would you give younger coaches that are looking to break in, especially at the D3 level? You know what I mean? Because for these guys that, May is coming real quick. They may not, maybe they're in the same boat as you. They're finishing up their student teaching. It's not necessarily what's the advice for these young guys?
It's really two-part. And this is something that it took me a long time to make any money. And you can't put a monetary value on happiness and fit. And I talked to so many young coaches that the shift has occurred to where, I just said, here we go, get off my lawn, right? But I took my first job for $3,000. I didn't have any benefits or anything like that. And that was $3,000 a year, right?
Right.
and I was happy there, right? And then, I came to Norwich, and a lot of people would tell me like, "Oh, this is when I was assistant." They thought, you're going to be a lifer. You're going to be a lifer. That wasn't my plan. It was just that I was happy. I had a good fit. I believed in the school. I believed in the program. I worked for Sean McIntyre, who was a very good coach. I worked for Mark Murniak, who was a very good coach. I was in a good situation.
Yeah,
So the money was really secondary. Also, I was married to a wonderful woman who supported my passions, which helps.
helps.
Um, it helps a lot. But a lot of young coaches I talk to now, they're so worried about how much money they're making. And I understand the necessities of living and paying rent and food. I get that. But if you're in a spot and you're happy and it's a good fit for you, like don't worry about money and don't take that first job for money, right? Take that first job about what it can do for you. And
Hmm.
if you're going to be in a good spot, if you're going to learn, if you're going to develop, if you're going to grow, are there good coaches on staff to be mentors, all that stuff. That would be my first one. And then my second one is it ties in kind of the same thing, but I've seen this for years. Guys I worked with, they're always talking about, complaining about, we don't get enough money, we don't get paid enough, we don't. Shut up and work really hard, and you'll get more money, right? If all the time you put into complaining about how much you were making or looking for a higher paying job, if you just focus that much energy on everything else, right?
Hmm.
Recruiting, doing everything you can to take stuff off the head coach's plate, you're going to get more money. But so many guys I've worked with a ton of, and they're great guys, don't get me wrong, but they were always kind of looking for, I got to make more money. I got to make more money. And I'm like, you could be, every year at not every year, but every couple of years at Norwich, I was able to get a little increase, a little bump here and there. And I was working hard and I was recruiting and I was bringing in kids and, taking some of the travel stuff off people's plates. And lo and behold, right, you start to be rewarded for that. So,
Right.
it's instead of worrying about that next opportunity and spending all your time looking for it, if you just do the best job you can, that opportunity is going to find you. Or maybe it's not an opportunity, it's just a little more compensation where you're at. That would be my biggest piece. And I think I finally get to say it publicly.
Coach, how has your 18 seasons at Norwich and the 3 seasons prior to that, how have they shaped your philosophy? I guess, and I mean that from, 2005 coach to 2025 coach. How have you changed, and what all has gone into that growth of your philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first piece is, and I say this a lot too, is particularly at this school. And I was really lucky. I've never worked for a bad head coach. I
Right.
haven't. I know a lot of people have, and hopefully my assistant coaches don't think they do, but they might. But um, so I took a lot of stuff from them, right? And you take the little crumbs about, I kept a notebook for 18 years, again, and I still keep adding to it, but 18 years as assistant of you know, if I'm in charge, I like this, right? Whenever I'm a head coach someday, I'm going to do this. Or I didn't like this. And when it's my turn, I would do it differently. And I mean, a spiral notebook, it's filled with just
Right.
notes. And I look back at some of the stuff and I'm like, what an idiot. Um, but just learning from coaches around you, taking stuff. And you can learn, a lot from, and it's not head coaches. Again, I've been really lucky, but maybe it's a coordinator, maybe whatever. But you can learn a ton about leadership from good leaders. You can learn a ton about leadership from bad leaders,
Hmm.
right? And I tell our students that a lot because they're in leadership situations at a military school. If they're ever complaining about, their cadre, whatever it may be, I say, hey, listen, someday you're going to be a leader. Make sure you do it differently then, right? You can learn a lot. So, you know, my philosophy, I think, has changed. Like when I first got into coaching, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. Um, I didn't have
Right.
a clue, and recruiting was even worse, right? I had no idea. And I think one of the things as I sit here in 2025, most people who know me would say that I recruit well. They feel like I'm a good recruiter. So, um, it's just being quiet and learning and screwing up over and over and just don't repeat mistakes. Um, but it's really shaped my philosophy. And probably 7 years ago, long before I was a head coach, above the door of my office, I put up a sign. It's still there today, and it just says, "Be the leader you would follow." So if ultimately for me, that's my philosophy in a nutshell, right? As I think back to I mean, I can go back to high school, right? Of
Right.
what did I want when I was a player? Because as much as kids change, kids don't change. So, what did you want? What did you crave? What did you need? And then also, right, looking back at idiot Bill that went to University of Maine and had trouble going to class and whatever, the accountability piece, the immature side, I had some coaches in high school telling me some things that I didn't want to hear that in hindsight, they were dead on. They were spot on. They knew me better than I knew myself. So, um, just again, like be that leader you would follow. Like what did you need? What did you want? And then what did you need? Because the kids here, I think I have a great rapport with the players, but they don't love me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There's 0% chance of that, right? But
Right.
as long as I'm giving them what they need or what I believe they need, and it's coming from a good place, I really think that's critical. My philosophy in a nutshell is be the leader you would follow and listen to the players, right? I mean, I just got this is a too strong a term, but called out a couple weeks ago by a player, not in a negative way, but he said, coach, hey, this. And instead of my initial reaction was to be like, hey man, be quiet. You don't know what you're talking. But mature Bill, who's in his 40s now, right, listened to what he said and realized, he's right. Right. So then all of a sudden we get a chance to get in front of the team again and say, hey guys, this is an area that hasn't been a strength for me. I want to be the best I can for you. So if there's something I could do better or you see me slipping, let me know. Right.
Right.
And just that effort did wonders for our kids. Just the fact that I was willing to acknowledge, right? Hey, this isn't my best area. I want to get better in it. And I'm here to serve you and get better in that regard. And the kids really appreciated it. So, try to be the leader you would follow and don't be too big and too smart to listen.
I think the second one is not that the first one isn't important, but I think the second one is something I think a lot of people that aren't coaches, just everyday people struggle with as well. So,
Yeah, for sure.
coach, so the big changes 2024, obviously we got an expanded playoff field, which I think when it first got announced, people weren't really happy with it. They weren't sure about the number. Now we see how it played out. I think everybody can agree it was time. The amount of schools there are and the amount of schools we were letting in, the percentages didn't make sense. The big change, and I want to get your opinion on it. The iPads, the addition of the iPads on the sideline, up to 18 of them. Is that something you guys are utilizing? And how did it go in the first year? Because I know that was kind of they announced it in April, it rolled out in September, and here we go. Let's go. And I know a lot of teams, even up to camp, were still kind of putting it together and trying to figure out what they were going to do.
Yeah, and when I answer this, I'll kind of have to answer it from experienced opponents. We didn't do it this year.
Mm-hmm.
The NUMAC conference essentially over the summer came to we're not going to mandate it, and every school gentleman's agreement, right? Hey, we don't have it. All right, we won't use it. We have it. We'll use it. And the brand new head coach came in and spent a whole bunch of money. So when I went back and asked for iPads, I kind of, unless it was a mandatory thing, no. So we didn't utilize it. Now, having said that, right, a lot of conference meetings with the other head coaches and seeing and listening and hearing from them. I think it was a benefit. I think people found it beneficial. I think that the technology side of it is still getting worked out. And, as much as I hate to say this, I'm certainly not a guy that's looking for like monopolies and stuff, but I wonder if the various platforms, if we'd all be better served if it was kind of one. Again, as a non-participant listening, some people used Huddle, some people used Game Strat, some people used whatever.
Right.
And I think there were 3 different platforms that were used in our conference. And, some different coaches had some different issues. And I don't know, I don't know if that had a lot to do with whether they interface well or not. And I'm not sure. But I mean, ultimately, I think like technology is here, whether we like it or not. And
Right.
despite the fact that I'm relatively young, I'm a bit of a old school guy, so I don't love it, but it is what it is. And I think as long as there's equity, right, and everybody has that same access, I don't see how it could be a negative. And just getting those bugs and glitches worked out so that it's smooth as, because again, we're D3, right? Georgia and Alabama and Texas, they can have, all kind of
They
guys
have
running
18
around.
coaches that can be
Yeah,
running around,
yeah.
and that's their job is the
Right. Like,
iPad.
the last thing we need is, the D line coach for a series is over there trying to work out the iPad kinks. That's I think where we're at with D3. If we can try to make sure that we're not taking coaches away from, their actual game day responsibilities,
Right.
whether it's team managers or whatever, who knows? But I do think it's here, and I do think there is a benefit to it.
Now, with it being here, and obviously the technology kind of rolling its way down the divisions, do you think we see, I don't know, microphones in the helmets work its way down to the Division III level? Do we see instant replay maybe? And I talked to a couple coaches last season specifically on they'd like to see instant replay for a guy that, you're only guaranteed 40 games. From the freshman year to senior year, you're guaranteed 40 games. What happens if in game 38 or game 39, a targeting call gets made, and now you've taken what may be this kid's last quarter or last game, and you've split it in half?
Right.
Is that something that you think you would like to see? Do you think it's coming down anyways down the pipeline? Because I've gotten a little bit of mixed answers on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think right, wrong, or indifferent, and I have some opinions, but I think we Division III, we strive to be everything that Division I is.
Right.
And there's some merit to that. I also tell our kids, make the big time where you are all the time. So there's some merit to that. I think both the things you're talking about are probably coming. I would definitely lean towards, I would prefer to see instant replay before any helmet communication. We had that exact scenario you talk about happen. And, I won't get into opponent or wherever, but we played a game, we were up, there was like 20 seconds left, we get a 4th down stop, and they made a call. And ironically, it wasn't even targeting. I still don't know what penalty they called 6 years later, but after, we all do it, right? You send in the clip, and the answer we got was, yeah, they blew that call. Well, we lost the game.
Yeah.
We
and
lost
that's
the game.
At the end of the day, isn't the goal to get the call right?
Right. And, and it's not, I don't, the coordinator of officials was great. And he said, yeah, listen, I'm really sorry, but they got that call wrong. And it's great to get some validation, but, for us that year, it took us from 5-5, or it took us from 6-4 to 5-5. We would have had a winning season, first one in a while. And, those kids that are seniors, whatever it may be. So, I think we all, to your point, the goal should be to get the call right. And if it goes your favor, it doesn't go in your favor. As long as it's right, I think most coaches can live with it. But when you're told after the fact, hey, they missed that call,
it's almost salt in a wound,
right?
At that sense,
exactly. So, and hey, kudos to the other team. They got extra downs and they made the play, and we didn't. But, I think everyone would probably be in favor of replay. Again, to your point of making sure the call is right, especially at our level, right? We don't have guys making 6 figures in NIL. We don't have, they're out there, they're paying their own way, they're playing football, they have limited opportunities. They have an opportunity, they should have an opportunity to win. And if it gets taken away from them for something that's a mistake, mistakes are human, but it's really unfortunate. So, I would definitely be in favor of seeing some instant replay stuff before we need the helmet communication. But I do think eventually it's all coming down the pike.
You don't want to be having that 13-second conversation with the quarterback right now. Maybe we'll give him a signal and let him go do his thing.
Yeah, the last thing the quarterbacks want to do is hear from me right before the play, believe me.
Coach, from a fan and alumni engagement side of things, what is a game day experience like? From the fans, from the alumni, from the student body, what is a game day experience like at Norwich?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I think it's as good as you're going to find in college football. And I say college football without a caveat for a reason. In the Northeast, we have all the pomp and circumstance of military school. We got a full corps of cadets march on for all our home games. We often have flyovers. Our artillery battery brings in a howitzer cannon. Our freshmen in the Corps of Cadets are called rooks. They stand in the end zones and they scream and yell and do push-ups. So it's a really fantastic environment. And we're in a unique space here where we're in central Vermont. There's no D1 football, and Norwich athletics is a big deal,
Right.
particularly hockey and football. We have national championship caliber hockey teams on both genders and football. Like our other sports are supported well, don't get me wrong, but hockey games and football games in Northfield, Vermont are a really big deal. We draw well, we have big crowds. And I think our kids, especially, again, I went to school right outside of Boston. Nobody even knew D3 football existed. I mean, back then at least, they barely supported BC. It's a pro sports town.
Right.
So being here where, there's no pro sports in the state and there's no D1 football, it's kind of unique in that we get a lot of attention. And then we have a vibrant tailgate scene. You talk about fan engagement. We have a very vibrant tailgate scene, and people plot and plan and work together and coordinate, and they travel. They're not the Bills Mafia by any stretch, but they're a good bunch.
They're the core. They're the core of Norwich.
That's right. That's right. And so, we have, I think, a really, really good and very unique game day environment here, atmosphere. People love many of our opponents tell me this is our favorite place to play, right? They love all that goes into it. So it's a lot of fun, and our kids get spoiled and all that, and in a good way. They're appreciative of it. And at the end of the day, it's their classmates, right, who are out there. And we got a tight-knit athletic department here where the athletes support each other. So, my guys are at the hockey games, and the basketball team is at our games, and so on and so forth. So it's a great little environment and a great little community. And then as far as alumni goes, I say this all the time. We have as passionate, and that's good and bad, right? We have as passionate an alumni base as I've ever seen. And, we're a small school, but we have that real niche where we have guys all over the country that graduated from here and played football, and some who didn't play football, but just loved going to the games or whatever it may be. And they're vocal, right? And again, that's good and bad. But I tell when my coaches get frustrated or my players say, listen, I've been where there's apathy. And I think in a lot of Division III schools, and I don't want to insult anybody, but I think for a lot of Division III football teams, I think there is apathy, right? Like if you had a good season, that's great. We're happy. If you had a bad season, it's okay. We'll get up next year. That is not the case here. These guys, and gals, right? They have a lot of passion, a lot of investment in the program. And I would much rather that than apathy, right? I would much rather, I'd rather be criticized than no one knows I exist. So, we have a passionate group, and they're very involved. They do an unbelievable job helping us raise funds, so on and so forth. They help with recruiting, internships. It's a really passionate bunch. And they, a lot of people from, I know guys who travel up here every home game weekend from Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, just to watch their alma mater play football. And I think that's pretty unique in Division III outside of like an alumni weekend, homecoming, whatever.
Right. Coach, we get 2 questions and then we get to the Fast Five. What would the message be to the fans, the alumni, the parents going into 2025? Obviously, we're early. I imagine we're not even in spring ball yet. But what's the message that if you could have one for them right now as we sit, what's the message for them?
Yeah, the first message is, I say a lot, I think we were on a cruise ship, right? And if you ever seen cruise ships, they don't turn fast. So we got it slowed down, and we got it turned around, and now we're facing the right direction, and now we're hitting the throttle to start having some success. But it takes everyone, right? And I mean, from the starters to the scout team players to the fans who come to the games and cheer and create that environment, to the alums who support the program in person, financially, on social media, whatever it may be. My message to them every time I talk to an alumni group or parents is, I am committed to putting forth a product that you can be proud of. That is my goal. That is my passion. The base here, again, if we got kids who play hard and they're physical, they care more about that than the wins and losses. They don't want us to win, don't get me wrong. But if the team goes out and plays hard and it's a physical bunch and they don't roll over and they'll fight you, that's what our guys want to see. And I'm committed to that. I'm committed to putting forth a product that makes everybody proud, from the student body to the alums, to the parents, to the fans. So that would be the message. We got the ship turned around. We're pushing the throttle, but we need your help. We can't do it without you. It takes everybody.
And then last, before we get into the Fast Five, what is the significance of Division III from a Division III guy?
Yeah, I think the significance is that, you know, hey, these are really good athletes,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's this like this narrative out there. I think that Division III is glorified intramurals. Like these are really good athletes. Um, Maybe 2 inches too short, whatever it may be, but that doesn't change the fact that, it's cliched, but these guys play because they love the sport. We
Right.
already talked once about NIL. Nobody on my team. I got two guys with NIL deals, and they get like free coffee and free sandwiches, basically, for doing, social media posts. So we got nobody who's making big money in NIL. We got nobody who's going to get drafted, probably best case scenario outside of like Ali Marpet and Pierre Garçon, some of those guys. But, best case scenario, these kids maybe will get signed as an unrestricted free agent, undrafted free agent, excuse me. So, they're playing because they love the game. They're
Mm-hmm.
paying their own way. And while I have this soapbox, I'm going to put it out there. Maybe the NCAA will hear this. We got it backwards. We should be allowed to redshirt in Division III because they're paying for it.
They're paying for it, not the other way around.
So if a kid says, hey, I want to take a red shirt, it's going to cost me more money. Why on earth would we say no? But we let the guys go into school for free do it. It drives me crazy. It doesn't make any sense. So there's my soapbox.
Coach, I just got an Apple Watch, and it has this little notification when your heart rate starts elevating a little bit. It's been a while since I thought about it in the bigger picture. I gotta take a deep breath here because that one got my heart rate up a little bit. It
just doesn't make any sense. If a kid in his family, again, 4 years of eligibility, don't get me wrong, but if a kid in his family want to put the money in so he can stay in school for 5 years and get his 4 years in, why on earth would we say no to that? It drives me crazy. These kids are paying their own way. They're playing because they love it. We don't have, we have great medical resources, but they don't always have the same resources that a lot of the big time programs do. Our kids sometimes have to wait a couple of days, maybe even a week to get an MRI. They're not going into the stadium right there and all that stuff. So, again, at the end of the day, it's kids that are true student athletes at the Division III level, whatever school you're talking about. They're balancing a lot. They don't have everybody doing their work for them. And they're doing it because they love it and they're paying their own way. And it's truly kind of the last kind of unmolested version of college athletics would kind of be D3 and D2 and D3, as money continues to creep in, I don't care what it is. Once money starts to creep in, it gets really ugly. And unfortunately, it seems like that's where we're headed with Division I football and athletics. So it's truly, pure college athletics, and they're great kids, and they're going to be the leaders of our country someday.
Coach, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be and why?
I'm such a loser. I would live in Kennebunk, Maine, my hometown. It was a great place to grow up. I grew up on the beach. I still got winters. I went skiing in the winters. And then again, spend the summers on the beach. And, I'm weird. I don't like heat and humidity, so I don't want to go south. I'm kind of right where I belong, a lifelong New Englander. Got a lot of family in Florida, great place to visit. Never want to live there. So yeah, if I wasn't here, I would find a way to go back and live right in my hometown. And I just love it there. It was a beautiful place to grow up. And there's some really special people and gritty people there that, helped mold me. And yeah, I wish I had something cooler to tell you, some, New Zealand or something like that. But, I've always been a bit of a homebody, and home is where the heart is, I guess.
If you weren't coaching, what would you be doing?
Man, that's a great question. And I tell you, I don't know the answer. I joke all the time. I was just talking to one of our admissions personnel about an hour before we got on here, and I haven't had a real job since I graduated college, is the way I look at it. And I love my job. I have fun every day. So it's hard. Now, all that being said, I often joke with my assistants that when they fire me, because we all hired to be fired eventually, right?
That's what I'm told.
Yeah. I always say, I think I would love to be a postman. I'd love to deliver mail. I like to be outside. I'm a big exercise guy. You put in the headphones, listen to a podcast, and walk around outside. I don't know. I have no idea what kind of money they make, but I think sounds like fun to me, right? And I love dogs. I got 5 of them myself. So hey, why not do something active? Burn some calories. Listen, I'm a big podcast guy. Listen to some podcasts and walk around outside. So yeah, maybe that'd be my answer. Be delivering mail.
I got to tell you, Coach, that's our, now we're only 3 episodes into this season. So, but that takes the cake for 2025. The top answer to that question still belongs to the University of Wisconsin-Platteville. Their coach gave us a very, very interesting answer. It has not been topped. Garlic farmer, because garlic continues to reproduce itself. So you would be in the gold, is what he told me.
Hey.
So, and that's out there, right? I mean, but the postman, I had a basketball coach that was a postman. So I kind of understand that. Work during the day and then go coach basketball at night. Let's see. What is the biggest takeaway overall in your career as we sit today in 2025? What is the biggest thing that you've taken away from the entire experience?
The biggest takeaway from the entire experience. It's a really good question. The biggest takeaway. You can significantly impact a young person's life, good or bad, in minutes.
Wow.
So it's taught me to be more measured, more empathetic, and to think before I speak, think before I tweet, think before anything, right? Because as a young coach and as a young man, I was an emotional guy. I think I'm still an emotional guy, but I think I've channeled it positively. But you probably could call me a hothead, right? And I don't always remember all the good things people said to me growing up, but I remember almost everything negative.
Yeah.
So I think the big takeaway is, again, you can significantly impact a young person's life negatively or positively in minutes. And you may be able to undo the damage, but it probably takes 10 times longer.
Right.
If you wounded that kid with your words or your actions in 3 minutes, it'll take, hours to make it
3 hours, 12 hours, something along those. Right. Makes sense.
If you have the opportunity. So, I just think the days of really ripping into a kid, right, wrong, or indifferent. Now they want more of why, other than, I said, yes, coach, and I would have run into a wall just because I was a dummy that did that.
Right. Right. So, I hear you there.
Yeah. So yeah, that would be a big, I hadn't necessarily articulated it until you asked the question. So appreciate that question because it made me think, but you can make a lot of positive impact or negative, if a rash reaction.
Coach, what is the best compliment you've ever received?
Oh, this one's easy. I'll even say his name in case he ever sees this. We had Blake Ireland, played inside linebacker for me, graduated in 2020. Interestingly enough, civilian student here at Norwich who is now in the Air Force, which happens a lot. You'd be surprised. But literally the best compliment I ever got as a football coach. He said, Coach Russell's the realist. And, I say all the time, and when I got this job, sometimes I think people change who they are and say they have to act like a head coach or be like a head coach or coach like a head coach. I don't know how to do any of those things, right? I know how to be me. So that's the best. I think I've stayed authentically myself, which seems to resonate with kids. So yeah, Coach Russell's the realist. would be the greatest compliment I've gotten in my coaching career.
And then, the other side of compliments. There's another side of compliments. What's the best insult that you've ever received?
The kids are, I couldn't tell you a specific insult, but I get picked on a lot for being bald. I get picked on a lot for being bald. And, I tell them all the time, I say, guys, you can fight nature all you want, but nature's eventually going to win. So when I was a junior in college and it started to go, out came the razor, and it's been that way ever since. Ironically, I'm married to a barber slash hairstylist, so I probably should have married a chef. So, I get something out of it, but don't tell her I said that.
You let them know that we all talked a lot of mess in our days. And then the more every day that you get older and you look in the mirror, you realize that your hairline may have been here, but it ain't there no more. And it's going to keep running. So
that's right. And I tell them all the time, mine didn't go gradually either. I shaved it once in college, and when it came back, it was thin. And I said, well, it's been nice knowing you. I guess this is over. This is what we do now. So I couldn't tell you an actual insult, but they're
on you a bunch, though.
They on me a bunch for being bald. Oh, I got another one. Very unique. Very unique. This wasn't an insult either, but this was make me feel, super, super tiny out there on the practice field. So we had an All-American kicker here who actually signed as an undrafted free agent with the Jacksonville Jaguars named Long Ding. And Long and I have stayed in touch. He's a great, great kid. And I like every other, not every other, but like a lot of idiots in the early 2000s, I got some tattoos on my ankles that were allegedly Chinese letters or symbols for words. So hopefully they stand for truth and loyalty. I asked Long Ding what they meant, and he said, Coach, I don't know. He may have been messing with me. I'm still not sure. But I didn't feel real good about myself.
You didn't feel real good about his I don't know. It was
yeah, I didn't feel real good about the trust in these stupid, here's the dumb American guy with these Chinese symbols on his ankles that I still haven't covered up. I try to find a way to put something over them. But that was kind of funny where, one day at practice, it was actually one of the other players. They're like, hey, Long, what do Coach Russell's tattoos mean? And he was like, I don't know. I was like, oh, no. So, me and Marcus Camby, I guess, out there with these symbols, we're not sure what they mean.
Coach, the final question we ask, you know what, that is, I have to pause. That's probably the most unique on the insult compliment. Like, it's right down the middle. It's a split because you don't know. He's probably going to, if he sees this, he's going to go, ha, gotcha, Coach.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Was there, I ask everybody this at the end of the show, was there a question that you were expecting me to ask you? And if so, how would you have answered it?
No, I would say the one I expected you to ask, you asked. Kind of like first year head coach, basically, again, you asked it better than this, but what don't they tell you, right, about being a first year head coach? I expected that question. Hopefully I answered it the way I wanted to. Yeah, I don't think that's, I mean, you asked us about our lack of success this year. So yeah, I mean, I think you hit everything. Yeah, I don't think there was anything that I thought you were going to ask that you didn't.
Okay.
But, hopefully I was prepared. I cheated. I watched some old episodes so I'd have a clue. I often shoot from the hip. Usually doesn't get me in trouble. But I wanted to at least go into this with an idea. And, again, Coach LeBeau, I've known for a long time. I really watched his episode closely because very similar situation, taking over as head coach at his alma mater after being an assistant there. While it's not my alma mater, I'd been here for a long time. So,
right.
Shout out Jay LeBeau for making sure I was prepared for this. But yeah, I mean, it was great to have the opportunity to talk to you. I think you do a lot for Division III football coaches and Division III football, and we have a very special game, and there's a lot of people who do a lot for it. So I hope you know that we all appreciate it.
Well, I thank you for that, and I also thank you, and hopefully the people at home will thank you, because when we finish up the interview, Coach was kind enough. Now it is an older video, correct? But it gives It gives the atmosphere. It's going to give you, I've watched it now twice because I wanted to see which way we were going to include it in some things. It's going to change your opinion of Division III college football atmospheres. I mean, it is a full-blown, I don't want to call it theatrical, but it's almost like to the top of what it can be in a small town. I mean, it's so I want to say thank you very much for taking the time. I was really glad when I reached out to you here right around the national championship. Hey, would you like to come on? Right away. And I don't know if it was 15 minutes. I got a message back. Yeah, let's do it. When do you want to go? So
I'm fanatical about getting back to people. I'm obsessive about getting back to people. So
I really appreciate it. It makes it easier for us to schedule here. I hope you had a good time, and I hope that you guys all enjoyed the show with Coach Russell of Norwich. But we'll be right back, Chuckleheads.
A city that we put U.S. Coast Guard Academy for our bicentennial homecoming. The rivalry between our two schools has a long and honored history, and we welcome the Bears back to Norwich to continue the tradition.
Something. We are underway in the little Army-Navy game. From the 12. And 4 wideouts again for Dunn. It's a handoff up the middle. It's Aaron Connor!
Wow! Like a foot of lightning there. Oh, wow.
1 game, 7:01 to go in the fourth quarter.
Whew, boy, did he hit that hole.
The crowd gets behind the offense. Biggest play of the game. Dunn, rolling right. The pass is complete upfield to Ryan Reed inside the Bears 15. Everyone on their feet. Hushed tones. Here we go. For the mug. The kick is up, and the kick is good. First time since 2004, the mug is coming home to Northfield.
Wow. Look at these guys going.
Drink from the mug, Clyde Tambura.
And 1 second.
Norwich wins 17-14 on Bicentennial weekend.
The homecoming crowd is going berserk. Responsibility for the mug. Take it care because we're going to get it back next year. Hey, the mug!
Thanks for checking out this episode of Dingo Talk. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. For more info and to contact the show, you can find us on Twitter @DingoTalk.